Let me give you some background about the Stargate program. It was started by two delightful fellows, one by the name of Hal Puthoff, PhD electrical engineer, and Mr. Russell Targ, a physicist. And it was started by the Central Intelligence Agency. In 1972 that started. And what happened was at that time, the two technical scientists wanted to understand how extrasensory perception might work. But the CIA was, no, we're using it to spying. No fundamental research at all. I joined that program late in 1975 as a consultant. And a well-known American psychic by the name of Ingo Swann I had met when I was working at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn. And he said, Ed, I can't tell you about the program, it's all classified, but gee, would you like to come to California? And I said, sure. So long story short, he browbeat Hal to hire me as a consultant. And eventually in 1979, I joined the staff as a senior research physicist. So then the rest is history. Hal left in 1985 and Russell left in 1982. And so in 1985, I inherited the directorship of the research. The Central Intelligence Agency sponsored the work until about 1974. The next sponsor was the U.S. Air Force at FTD, Foreign Technology Division. And that was run by a guy, our contract monitor, so when somebody from the agency looks over what you're doing. He came and that was the next funding. Then the major source of funding after that was the Defense Intelligence Agency with one major, bigger source of funding. And that was the Army Medical Research and Development Command. And the commanding general gave us $10 million. The program had some ups and downs, quite a bit like any program. And what was fascinating about that, I want to say, the amount of money total was about $22 million, which sounds like a lot of money if you're doing ESP research. But it is no money at all if you're in dealing with the Defense Department and the intelligence community. I mean, yet we had visibility at two presidents knew what we were doing and approved what we were doing, vice presidents, agency directors, and so on, far, far above what they should be paying attention to, but they did with us. And they improved it. We had three missions. And the first one was to use this ability, apparent ability, to gather intelligence during the Cold War. The reason for that is it's cheap and it doesn't put anybody in harm's way. You don't need people sneaking around behind enemy lines like in World War II. However, if we could spy on them, they could spy on us. And if they could spy on us, what our second mission was to assess the capability of other countries. And so I had an opportunity to travel to behind the Iron Curtain during those days to say, well, what are you guys doing, you know? And then lastly, we had two types of research to focus on. One is how to make the intelligence product better. You know, do you eat M&Ms or wear funny slippers or whatever it is to make it better? And the second one, under General Ratman's tutelage, we could do some basic research to figure out how this stuff might work. That said, we didn't figure that out yet. We're still working on it. The research was aimed at who can do this. The Army wanted to train psychic soldiers that they were. And what we found, number one, you can't train this stuff. You can't teach people how to do this. And you can't teach, you can train people to the level of what their natural skill level is. Everybody has a little bit of psychic functioning, but there are superstars. And we only worked with them. And we had a total of about 12 over the years. The Soviets had 150 by spying on us. So what we found is about 1% of selected populations can meet laboratory standards for being able to do reproducible experiments in lab conditions. We had our own cadre of super remote viewers who we learned. One way to find them is we tried all kinds of things, psychological tests, behavioral tests, IQ tests, you name it. But the only thing that worked was to get a whole room full of people and ask them to do remote viewing and pick the handful of ones that were really good at it, bring them into the laboratory and study them individually. And with that, we're able to find the cadre of people I'm still working with now after 40 years. Well, the kind of tests that we do varies, but it's a very simple idea. We developed, long story short, a set of photographs there are 300 of them, and we have them lumped together so we have know which photographs are different from each other and so on. City photographs are different than farm photographs, for example. And we say, okay, tell you what, please access and describe a photograph I'm going to show you in about 10 minutes. And the person says, how do I do that? And I would tell them, have no idea. You get to write and draw, or some people even take clay and model their experiences in clay. Now, what picture are they supposed to get? It's randomly chosen after they finish their interpretation of what it might be. And then there's a way of judging that and so on to make sure that you're not fooling yourself or them. And sure enough, it survives. It works. And it sounds a little bit like too much magic. So part of it is a learned behavior on my part and other good monitors. So I learned a lot of what I do from Russell Targ on the program. That if someone is upset about things, they're not going to be able to tie their shoes properly, let alone be a good remote viewer. And that's a subjective experience that you have to try to understand the person sitting opposite you. And so it's casual. It's not, we don't put you into some altered states of consciousness or have you sleep on the floor or whatever. You're sitting across a table and it looks really good. And I would say to the person, all right, you ready to go? Yeah, okay. Here's your tasking. Please access and describe a photograph that I'm going to show you about a half an hour from now. Or if it's an outbound site, we might say, please access and describe a location I'm going to take you to in about an hour from now. And somehow that works. Each of the how do remote viewers prepare for this session is an interesting topic. And it turns out that there's no standard procedure. Everyone does something different. One of our remote viewers, a woman named Angela Ford, and I normally couldn't name these people, but they've outed themselves and they've given me permission to say this here. Her idea is she'll just stretch out on the couch or in a comfortable chair and kind of not meditate, but just relax. Joe McMonagle is quite variable. This guy will sometimes say, it's all business. I'm ready to go, let's do it. You know, or sometimes he says, give me about 10 minutes to relax and clear his mind. But there's no formal ritual like a meditation or things like that. We've looked at hypnosis, for example. Would that help? Lucid dreaming. A lucid dream is a dream you become aware in your dream that what you're experiencing is a dream. And there's a case like that I could describe to you about that. It was kind of amusing. There's no standard. I think humans are wonderfully diverse. And it's true of remote viewers, you know. They all have different procedures. For example, Angela Ford, when she's ready to go, I give her the tasking, please access and describe a photograph I'm going to show you. She has a blank piece of paper and she does automatic writing. She goes scribble, 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 scribble. It's unintelligible, it's not writing, it's just scribbling. And then she turns the sheet over and nails it. Angela Ford had a 37-year career in the intelligence analyst business, and a small fraction of it, like 9 years, she was a remote viewer for the Stargate program, and mighty, very good at the job. However, I think that one of the best examples, I need to describe for you something called associational remote viewing, which the Army asked us to develop. If you want to answer which horse is going to win a horse race, say there are 6 of them, the wrong question to ask, which horse is going to win the horse race? Because you have to, horse 1, horse 2, horse 3, and you can't get those numbers out of your head. So what we do in association remote viewing is you have someone say, oh, okay, tell you what, someone not associated with the remote viewing monitor and the participant randomly assigns interesting locations around the Bay Area if we're going to have a horse race here. And if horse 1 wins, we take the person associated with that is the Golden Gate Bridge. If horse 2 wins, that's a gas station in Palo Alto, and so on. All right. So we sit down with the participant, in this case Angela, except it was photographs, and said, please access and describe a photograph I'm going to show you tomorrow. And we were betting on sports betting. And what determined which picture she would be shown was the output of whether the sports bet worked or it didn't. So if the sports bet worked, she would get one picture. If the sports bet didn't work, she'd get a second picture. So if she accurately described a picture I'm going to show her, and that was determined by the future outcome of the sports bet, it would work. And she just nailed it. And what I mean by that, it was a Asian-looking building with pillars like that and water in front and hills in the back. She just drew that beautifully. That's probably one of the best I've seen of hers. In one example, I would talk about an operational remote viewing, which is our words for spying. And the National Security Council here in the US knew that there was a building in Severodvinsk, Russia, along the White Sea. And they knew from other sources something interesting was going on in that building, but they had no idea what was. So they gave us the geographical coordinates, actually, of that building and a photograph, but we used the satellite photograph. But we gave the remote viewer, Joe McMonagle, actually, I can name him, of the geographical coordinates of that building. And he produced 127-page transcript describing what was in that building. About a huge submarine, it eventually was known after the fact. On September 23rd, 1980, the Russians launched the largest submarine in history at that time, called the Typhoon-class submarine. There have been popular movies about that and so on. And that was an intelligence first, actually, for him. And I had no idea. Everybody's blind. We have no idea what's inside the building, including the U.S. military. They knew it was a submarine base, but they had no idea what was going on in that specific building. One of the real pressing issues in research in this area is what's going on in the brain. And to first order, we haven't yet got anywhere close to that. We don't know how the data gets from the photograph in the next room into the brain. And once it's in the brain figures out what to do with it, and it is probably doing the same thing with that information that it does with all other information it gets from its other sensory systems. So it's unlikely, in fact, that's why people who have looked at EEG and MRI devices and all kinds of fancy brain monitoring things and do not see it. Now there's a secondary problem. We did an EEG study at Stanford. And you bring the participant in and wire them up with all this stuff on their heads and say, okay, be psychic. The problem is the remote viewers don't have knowledge when they are psychic. So like Joe McMonagle's coming into the parking lot, everything that's psychic is going to happen to him as he stops his car in the parking lot. By the time he gets to the lab, it's all over. So it's not a surprise when you start looking in the brain for what's going on when they are being psychic, you don't see anything because it happened before they even got in there. And the idea is maybe the tasking gets them becoming psychic, opens that door to this vast information. And if that's the case, if I just say to somebody who's going to be a remote viewer, we got an appointment for next Wednesday, that's enough of the tasking. They're already being psychic. What would you require of a skeptic before they believe it? And the problem is there isn't any standards in statistics. One of the aphorisms that are often said, well, exceptional claims require exceptional proof. And that's true. We have, I think, exceptional proof. There is a woman named statistician, Professor Jessica Utz. I don't know if you've heard that term. She was head of the statistics department at UC Irvine, and she became in 2016 head of the American Statistical Association, top statistician in the country. And she gave a 70-minute talk as the president, and of that 70 minutes, 7 minutes of it was about her interest in work in parapsychology. Neuroscientist of note. And he says, I don't buy any of this story. And I said, okay, what would it take to convince you? He said, it would have to work every time. And I said, wait a minute, there's nothing in your neuroscience that would meet that standard. Why are you tying it to us? And so the issue is a bigger sociological, perhaps philosophical, perhaps even religious issue of what impinge upon people deciding whether this is real or not. Over the years, we had a little over 500 separate spying missions to use remote viewing. And those spying missions were spread across 19 federal U.S. agencies, like the CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, Secret Service, and so on. Usual suspects. And of those 19 agencies, 17 of them returned with additional missions, including the CIA, even though they're on record saying it didn't work. Why do they keep coming back if it wasn't working? It was massively successful. And that's not my assessment. That's what the government, the people who use this material said it was massively successful. You can't keep coming back for additional spying missions if it weren't successful. That said, did we have failures? You bet we had lots of failures as well. Not failures of in any given experiment or spying. We had failures conceptually. Like we couldn't train people. We wanted to be able to train people. You can't do it. We wanted to tell the government people how to use this stuff properly. Never worked right. They never paid any attention to us. It was very frustrating. And there's a whole list of not a whole list, 5 or 6 things that we just failed at. Understanding how it works, for example. There's a fellow at Princeton University, Roger Nelson, and he and his colleagues put together what they call the Global Consciousness Project. What that was, they took random generators, devices, little small ones, that would generate random sequence of binary bits, and they installed them globally around the planet, all over the place, including India and China, Norway, you name it. And the idea is, what they thought was happening, based on earlier research, that human experiences change the behavior of these otherwise random things. And sure enough, it looked like they had a lot of data. I looked into it myself a great deal. There was nothing global and nothing consciousness about it. It was Roger Nelson's own extrasensory perception. That he had a choice to pick out events which he knew would work psychically and not pay attention to psychic events that wouldn't. For example, 9/11, sure enough, that seemed to work. But you know, the world football soccer match happened later, and he said, I'm not going to do that. Why not? There are far more people involved in that than 9/11. And who is it that's 9/11? Or there was a big earthquake in Turkey, 50,000 people dead. I said, well, when you're doing this, who is responsible for this? No one could answer these questions. Is it people that find out about it later, or the relatives of the people who died? What is it? When? Does it matter? And I was working with somebody on that program, and it turns out when that Turkish earthquake happened, there was a big spike in however they analyze all this stuff in the data from all these random generators. It happened about 15 minutes before the earthquake hit. I said, oh, that's kind of interesting. And all these people had to be precognitive. I said to the guy doing the analysis, what time span would you allow this to happen? He said, plus or minus an hour. I'm good at programming. So I did some what is called Monte Carlo programming. The end result of that was that the probability that they would see that deviation within plus or minus 1 hour was 50% by random chance.